Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Got a special, somewhat bite-sized treat for you this week. Over at the Seed Growers podcast feed, host Dan Brisebois is starting a mini-series on the basics of seed growing that can help you get started growing your first seed crop this year. Dan is really good at distilling this information down to the most important components, so we wanted to share that first episode here. And if you are not already, go subscribe to the Seed Growers podcast to hear the rest of it coming up. As those episodes are released, just search for the Seed Growers podcast wherever you are listening to me now. As always, sign up to be a patron at patreon.com/no-till-growers, or head over to no-till-growers.com and pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or a hat or some other merch. All of the proceeds from those sales just go to making you more content. Anyway, that's it from me. Thanks, y'all. And here's Dan Brisebois of the Seed Growers podcast.
You can grow seed on your farm. It's easier than you think. And if more vegetables and cut flower growers were growing seed on their farms, we'd have a more resilient seed system and better adapted varieties for farms. So, as a warm-up while you wait for the second season of Seed Grower interviews on this podcast, I've put together 5 weekly mini episodes that will cover the basics of what you need to consider so you can grow your first seed crops this summer. Welcome to episode 11 of the Seed Growers podcast. I'm Dan Brisebois, seed grower at Tournesol Cooperative Farm and spreadsheet and crop planning enthusiast. Today's episode is about getting into the mindset for your first seed crop. In the show notes, I've summarized the key concepts from this episode. There are also links to get more seed growing resources and a link where you can tell me what seed questions you want me to answer in future episodes. So let's get into that mindset for your first seed crop. And that mindset is start small. Your first seed crop will not be the one that preserves all biodiversity. And your first seed crop is not where you select that perfectly adapted variety that thrives on your farm better than any commercially bought seed. In fact, your first seed crop might not be that great. And that's kind of the point. Your first seed crop is where you open your eyes and start paying attention to your crops in a new way. It's where you start to see the timing of when you should harvest that crop. It's about discovering the rhythms of when the seed is ready to harvest and the techniques to harvest that seed and clean it. It's about beginning your journey learning the craft of being a seed grower. And because of all of that, I'm giving you permission to ignore isolation distances, cross-pollination, population sizes. Don't worry about all that botany, and don't worry about making sure crops grow true to type. I only want you to pay attention to one botanical concept at the start of your seed journey, and that is the difference between open-pollinated and hybrid seeds. Open-pollinated seeds, which are also called OP seeds, are stable varieties that will give you the same variety the next year. The term open-pollinated is also used in contrast to hybrid seeds. Hybrid seeds are created by crossing 2 plant lines. The hybrid seed you sow will be very uniform, but if you keep seeds from a hybrid and grow them out, you will get a large diversity of different characteristics. This can be really exciting if you want to develop new varieties. But it's very frustrating if you want to reliably grow a specific crop that looks and behaves a certain way. Hybrid seeds are usually marked on seed packs and seed catalogs with an F1 in their name. Now, some crops are pretty much only available as OPs. This includes beans, lettuces, and peas. Varieties of these crops are pretty much only OP seeds. For some crops, most of the market varieties are now only F1 hybrids. And then there's crops in the middle, where you can find a lot of OPs and a lot of hybrids. Crops like tomatoes and cucumbers and squash. For your first seed crop, make sure the variety you choose is an OP. It'll make everything easier after that. Now, let's get back to that start small mindset. For your first seed crop, I recommend you only keep seed for 1 to 3 crop varieties. And you should choose those varieties right from the start before your growing season. That'll let you build momentum to keep on that seed growing journey throughout the whole growing season. In a future episode, I'm going to walk you through more considerations of how to choose your first seed crops But for today, I'll mention that tomatoes and hot peppers are great first vegetable seed candidates, and cut flowers like calendula, poppies, nigella are also great first seed crops. Here are a few steps to follow during the growing season to make keeping that seed just a little bit easier. First, flag the plantings where you want to keep seed this year. Then, tell your crew that you're all embarking on a seed growing journey together. Make sure your folks know what crops are the seed crops. And as the season progresses, if there are things you're letting go to seed, make sure people know that these aren't weeds or spent crops that need to be pulled. Next, every week, go and take a walk and look at your intended seed crops. See what they're doing. Watch them grow into a big plant and then go to flower and set pods or fruits or some other seed-bearing structure. And when those pods or fruits appear, break some of them open, pay attention to what's inside, and evaluate if the seed looks like it's mature. And when the seed is mature, it's time to harvest those fruits or pods or seed-bearing structures and bring them indoors. If you're dealing with a wet, squishy fruit like a tomato or pepper, you'll need to extract and dry the seeds before the whole thing rots on you. On the other hand, if you're harvesting dry pods, you don't have to thresh the plants and extract the seeds right away. You need to get your harvest into a dry area where it can wait out of the rain until you have time to deal with it. You might want to do some preliminary cleaning to reduce the plant footprint and make it easier to handle the seed, but this is an optional step. Many growers spread out seed crops in their propagation greenhouse during the summer when that area is mostly empty. And then they'll clean the seed in the off-season. Whatever you do, make sure to label the drying seeds. Write down the variety name and the date you harvested the crop. And make sure to label things at every step of the way after that point. Now, even when it's time to clean the seed, you don't have to get it perfectly clean. You'll need to get the big bits and most of the small chaff out of the way. If you're having trouble getting the last bits of plant material separated from your seed, that might not be a problem when you're using your own seed. You can still sow dirty seed in a seedling tray or in the field, and it's still going to germinate. The last part of the start small mindset for your first seed crop is what are you going to do with that seed once you've kept it the following year when it's planting time. One of the important parts of becoming a seed grower is learning to trust your seed and your abilities to grow a reliable seed crop. When you're crop planning for next year, treat your seed, the seed that you kept, the same way you would treat any new variety that you were trialing. That means only growing a small number of plants from your own seed and relying on your usual seed varieties and sources for the remaining plants. Now, what that looks like is if you were growing 1,000 tomato plants, then maybe grow only 20 to 50 plants from your own seed. If those plants do really well, then you'll grow more plants next year, maybe 100 plants. And if those 100 plants do really well, the following year you grow 200 plants from your own seed. So you can phase into using your own seed over a few years. As you become comfortable with those first seed crops, you can also add more seed crops into the mix. By starting small and taking your time, there's more chance that seed growing seems realistic on your farm and that you persist and develop your seed skills. This is how you become a cornerstone in a resilient seed and farming community system. Now, I know I told you not to worry about isolation distances and cross-pollination, but you might still be feeling scared about winding up with crossed-up seed. So next week, let's talk about how cross-pollination works and how much of a risk it is when you're growing your own seed. So don't forget to read those show notes, and I'd love it if you clicked on the link and tell me what seed questions you'd love answered. Thanks to the No-Till Growers crew for making this podcast happen, and thank you for listening. Go out and be seedy.